Today is the Advent celebration of joy, and the reading from Zephaniah makes this clear. Zephaniah tells the people to rejoice, for the Lord has taken away all judgments against them and turned away all their enemies. Paul, too, in his letter to the Philippians, also tells the people to rejoice and not to worry about anything, that the Lord is near. But then in the lesson from the Gospel, John the Baptist comes in to speak to the crowds, and he's not as gentle. "You brood of vipers," he calls them, "who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" He goes on to tell them that just having Abraham for an ancestor, that just being members of God's chosen people is not a guarantee of salvation for any of them. He points out that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from the stones lying around on the ground where they stand, that they cannot be complacent, that just being descendants of Abraham is not their ticket to heaven. He's so harsh it wouldn't be remarkable if the crowds left or turned ugly, but they didn't. They stayed, and they asked him what they should do. His message to them is the one that Jesus has taught all along, a message that we desperately need to hear in this contentious and fearful time. What should we do, the people ask? And John tells them, whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none, and whoever has food must do likewise. He tells the tax collectors, an unpopular group in those times, collect no more than the amount prescribed for you. And to the soldiers, he says, do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusations, and be satisfied with your wages. He gives each of the people who ask him what they should do a path to follow. He doesn't tell them, as Jesus told another young man who asked what he should do, give everything away you have and follow me. That was too much for the young man, for it was written, he had many possessions. John's message is much easier. He simply tells them to share, to give their extra food or surplus clothing to those who have none. That task requires faith that the givers won't need the extra later, or if they do, it will be provided for them as they are providing it now. To the tax collectors and soldiers, both of whom have positions of power over those who have none, he tells the one group not to steal and the other not to be bullies of those who are helpless. This message from John is one that is sorely needed now as our nation and our world is beset by natural disasters, bickering leaders, threats and violence in our nation and beyond, and an increasing resistance to even listen to each other. We need to listen to each other. We need to listen to John. And Jesus' message is clear as well. If we have more than we need, we should help those who are without. And we owe it to humanity to find our common ground and to seek the truth. In an argument with someone about what was surely not true, what was a rumor sent out to promote fear and division among us, I asked, have you researched that? The person I was talking to said, no, that's my opinion. I have the right to have my own opinion. Yes, I agreed gently, you do, but don't you at least want to find out if your opinion is based on something that is true? I don't need to research it, I was told. It's my opinion. The actual definition of the word opinion is a view or judgment formed about something, not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. I guess I knew this, but when teaching language arts, I would always tell my students that their opinions should be backed up by facts, never realizing that by definition I was forcing them to research something that doesn't have to be researched because it doesn't have to be based on fact or knowledge. Yikes. I feel like for us to ever come together on things, that we have to be talking about things that are true, not simply throwing opinions at each other. That way lies madness. That way yawns an ever-widening gulf among people who should know better and who do know better if they think about it. One truth I've come to believe in my life is that many people lack empathy with others unless they themselves have experienced what the others are going through. If you've never lacked for food or shelter, you may not understand the plight of the homeless. If you have always had adequate money, you might not understand on how little some people are forced to live. And if you believe others' opinions that those people are in that situation because they are lazy or undeserving, you will never have empathy. And you are definitely not following Christ's vision of our world, where we help those who need us, who need us. Not just those who fit into whatever tidy category we feel makes them deserving, not just those like us or as close to like us as we can manage. The tax collectors, the prostitutes, the soldiers of Rome, the outsiders, the untidy, the poor, the unwashed. We don't get to throw those people under the bus because Jesus didn't. If we just give to those whom we believe are deserving, then we are setting ourselves up to be both judge and jury, deciding who needs our help. Based on what? How they look? How polite they are? Jesus helped lepers. He helped those who are outcast in his society, criminals, beggars, people who couldn't walk or were blind or deaf, people that nobody else would help. How can we be followers of Jesus as Christians do less? On a website called thevalueofsparrows.com, love that name, I found a sermon written by a man named Ronald J. Allen, and in it he tells his story about visiting an upper middle class congregation located downtown in a conservative part of Southern California. Their minister humorously called them the first church of the hard line. Beautiful old mission-style building with polished brass, carved wood, and stained glass that comes alive in the sunlight. Wednesday night dinners followed by a youth program and classes for adults. One night, a couple of scruffy-looking grade school-age Hispanic children looked in the open door while they were eating and wandered in. Kids looked longingly at food. What do you do? The kids came back, and gradually their story came out. They had come from Mexico, been abandoned by their father, and now lived with their 4 siblings and single-parenting mother, who had a minimum wage job and no prospects of getting a better one because they were in this country illegally. Someone from the congregation took some clothes to the home. They didn't have much food, clothing, or school supplies because so much of their money went to the rent. The mother said if they went back to their part of Mexico, prospects weren't any better. Tedious, low-paying work, poor schools, limited futures. At least here, they had the long-term possibility of working for a better life. The congregation talked informally about what to do. Report them for deportation? Hard times, hard lines are hard to hold when people have names and faces and stories and hearts. You know how these things happen. A bag of clothing turns into a box of food every week, and trips to the optometrist, and summer camp, and help with school. It also turned into legal advice, and to several members of the congregation coming to think that there are inconsistencies and inequities in U.S. policies regarding persons who are in this country in situations similar to that of the kids who looked in the door of the church that night, and writing letters to Washington to point out these things. It's not a whole new world, but it's a step away from hanging on to what we've got and a step towards a better one. The minister, a friend of the writer, said, "I don't know whether it's the kids or not, but we laugh more. now than we used to. There it is, and it's worth saying again. Hard lines are hard to hold when people have names and faces and stories and hearts. I call it empathy, and I think it happens when you see how it is. You experience it, in this case, through the faces of those hungry children. On CBS News the other night, there was a story about a secret Santa, a man who has made a habit of going around giving money to people he sees who need it. This time, the secret Santa enlisted the help of a homeless man, and the joy on the face of the man who had nothing as he gave money to those who had little, but couldn't pass him by without dropping a little money in his cup, was a delight to see. He said that the people he gave money to, who were very grateful, were not nearly as happy as he was, and indeed, as you looked into the face of the giver, you knew this was true. How empowering it is to help others who need it, and how much more empowering it must have been to one who had never been privileged to be in that position before. Matthew Skinner, a professor in the New Testament at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, says Luke's gospel of liberation can help us in these trying times. Salvation manifests itself through Jesus in local ways, one scene at a time, one meal at a time, and one interaction at a time. In Luke, he says salvation means belonging. And what better way to belong than to break bread together? We've seen it with the soup lunches, with our potlucks. Eating together brings community. So, Skinner says, better make room at your table. Amen.